Hey everybody, so Hamada is the founder and CEO of Right Track Admissions, a firm dedicated to helping folks get into their dream university programs. He's a lawyer by trade, educated first at UCLA and then at UC Berkeley for his law degree. He's also a world traveler, having been to over 130 countries and counting. Hamada, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Julian, for having me. Excited. As you mentioned, I did my undergrad at UCLA. I'm in Santa Monica now, so I did my undergrad down the street, and then went on to go to UC Berkeley for my law studies. Actually, I took a year out during law school to pursue a master's in international relations in Cambridge, in England. And I can talk more about why I made that decision kind of like in the middle of, or basically, yeah, I guess in the middle of my first year of law school, and then decided to do that master's in 1 year and then come back and continue law school. And then all the while, I started really getting the travel bug since I was a kid, but specifically when I did that master's in England and started traveling really extensively. That was, I don't even know, maybe 20 years ago at this point, closing in on 20 years, and have been traveling ever since. And small correction, I've been to about 150 countries now, and I'm on my last 50, which is why I started the YouTube channel Final 50 World, to kind of cover those last 50 countries that I haven't been to. So I'm excited to do that and see more of the world. But it kind of all comes together. My academics, the kind of job experiences I had, and this passion projects that I've been putting together.
Yeah, I can safely say that we don't often have lawyers who are also world travelers on our show. So this is certainly an honor. 150, that's tremendous. I want to take a step back real quick. So a lot of lawyers leave the law. It's becoming increasingly common, in my opinion, whether it's doing admissions work like yourself or business side or being an entrepreneur. Tell me a little bit about your journey kind of in law, and what was it that sort of led to you to make the transition out of the profession into doing something related but not actually practicing?
Small corrections, because I do practice law to some degree, but to your point, it's not like what we imagine to be the case in law school, where you're working at a firm and billing hours, or working for a judge, or working on your own with your own practice, like the typical areas where most people get into. I think for me, when I started law school, my goal is, what was law school going to provide me with? What were the key, not just strength, but skills that you can really tap into? Honestly, first and foremost, it gave me a lot of confidence and a sense of empowerment. And that's more esoteric, right? Because you can't really kind of quantify that, but it gave me some sense of like real strength from that perspective. Number two, it gave me the ability to fine tune how to write with an argument framed perspective, so that you have almost like what we cover in law school, IRAC, right? Issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. You start approaching a lot of arguments and even discussions that are from that perspective. You kind of identify the issue, you try to find a middle ground, and you have a conclusion from it. So it provided me, not only from a writing perspective, but from an oral perspective, how to be more in tune in terms of my communication skills. Obviously, it helped me learn how to think analytically, critically. Those are core key factors that really transcend almost any profession. So when I graduated, I worked in private law for about a year, and then the economy plummeted in 2009, as you may remember, with the economic crash. And so for me, I was let go from the law firm I was at in San Francisco, Pillsbury Winthrop at the time. And instead of looking for another firm, I decided to see, like, how can I future-proof what path I would take and not to be codependent on one company to get me across the goal line. And that kind of came from admissions, oddly enough. And people would say, like, how do you future-proof with admissions? Admissions is cyclical and counter-cyclical. If the economy is really good, people want to take a little time off, get another degree so that they can jump back into a good economy and continue their trajectory, right? Plus, they have a little bit of money that they've saved, and they want to kind of pursue academics, law school, as an example. If the economy is really in bad shape, you can imagine people are going to take time off because they don't have a job, or their job is really waning, or it doesn't seem like there's a lot of future, so they decide to get out go to law school, pursue a dream at them maybe they've always wanted to pursue, do law school. So when the economy gets better and they've weathered it in law school, then they have a degree to kind of pursue thereafter, right? So it's counter-cyclical. So I want to kind of future-proof that. So I started my right track admissions around then, like 2008, 2009, and have continued it part-time while I do other endeavors. And it's funded my desire to travel around the world because I could pretty much do right track globally. And then eventually, quick fast forward, right track and so forth also became an opportunity to kind of, hire a team and grow the company. So that's more, it's not just me running it, but it's a whole team of experts with areas of expertise I don't even have to really kind of bring about the whole comprehensive perspective from admissions. So law provided me the confidence. It provided me with the experience having gone through law school and the admissions process. And it allowed me to pursue entrepreneurial ventures. That's one trajectory. Law school also, and being a lawyer, also allowed me to try different areas of law. So I did international development, working with the US government, and now I help veterans get their disability benefits as a operations partner, so to speak, of a law firm that does that. So I don't go to court per se all the time. I focus more on like how can we build the practice. And again, it's crazy. Just law school provides you with a lot of that confidence, that ability to think critically and clearly on how you can make something grow and so forth. It's not a coincidence that people like you, an entrepreneur, that have a law degree, that people, presidents can be lawyers, that heads of companies can be lawyers. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do this.
I completely agree. So right now, are you leveraging the degree at all to practice? Like
Yeah.
consulting work? Is that kind of what it looks like?
Yeah, exactly. I think, first of all, I got the California bar. I got the DC bar I waved in. So I had those two bars and I've kept them constantly. You never know when something hits your plate. And like you, like me, like other people that went to law school, even if you hyper focus, let's say on IP or environment, you still took corporate law, right? You still took contracts. You still have the wherewithal to take on different client work in different areas, maybe not the highest levels, and you're not an expert, but you're a generalist and you can do that kind of work. So I keep my law degree active, especially in California, doing contract law when it comes up, focusing on this practice, developing certain, agreements and so forth for the practice and for disability benefits, and even for running my company, that you have some legal aspects to it as well. So you're always dabbling in law. It saves you money not having to go to get legal counsel because you can do it. And or I have friends like you that can say, hey, Julian, can you quickly look over this contract? You'd be like, sure, we're friends, we're buddies, we can do that. So it gives you a whole network of people that can also kind of help you from a variety of perspectives as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that you conceptualize law school as more than just being a lawyer, because I similarly went to law school, not necessarily to practice law my whole life, but to get the JD, because the JD is a very powerful tool, whether you want to practice law or go into business or be an entrepreneur or go into journalism. I don't really see other degrees conferring the same sort of variability and versatility that the JD does, especially because you can practice law at any given moment, and law in and of itself is sort of protected by the free market because we're a guild profession, so not any MBA grad can go out and practice law. So to that end, I appreciate that characterization. Talk to me a little bit about what you've seen personally. You are probably closer to the admissions cycle / just landscape than 99.99% of people out there. From my layperson's perspective, I can tell you it seems like it's just getting more and more competitive across the board. I've heard that, law school admissions sort of applications spiked in 2020 because of, I think, geopolitical turmoil. A lot of people were inspired to be lawyers, but maybe now it's tapering down. Give me the sort of 5-year, let's say 5-year tenure, and then your whole career collectively perspective on where you see admissions now competitively and qualitatively, and perhaps where you see it going.
Historically, obviously, trends have said that, law school has maintained a certain trajectory of growth anywhere from 5 to 10% year on year, right? Like you said, it's a guild profession, so you can practice business, but a business person can't practice law, right? Otherwise, there's a lot of conflict of interest. I mean, you may have seen Arthur Anderson and all that kind of stuff where they were practicing accounting, then they want to get into legal aspects and business, and there was too much going on there, the conflict of interest for clients. So historically, it's just been a very safe profession to be able to kind of pursue in a lot of ways. And so there has been a growth year on year, but then there was a dip because of costs of law schools going up, lack of opportunities in some spaces, especially when the economy crashed at the time. So there was a little bit of a hiccup. But since then, unlike MBAs, where MBA has taken a significant dip in many ways because it's like a vitamin, right? Whereas law is like an antibiotic. You've got to take it to be able to practice. An MBA is just a nice to have, right? There's no prerequisite to starting a company to have an MBA, right? Or
Yeah.
prerequisite typically is the case. So from that perspective, law took a little bit of a dip during a bad economic swing, as in the people who graduated like me could not find employment a year or two, and then it kind of swung back up. I don't anticipate anything really happening to the legal profession for the next 5 to 10 years. If anything, it keeps going more and more because things get more litigious. There's always going to be a necessity for corporate law, employment, medical malpractice, personal injury. I mean, the area is just blowing up everywhere. And here in California, for example, personal injury is one of the most lucrative and sought after fields of law, for good or for bad. So there's always going to be room for that profession. The only hindrance is what law school do you get into, the network, the type of professors, and are you willing to dish out? When I went to law school at Berkeley, it was about $15,000 to $25,000 a year. It's looking more like $40,000 to $50,000. So are you willing to take on that financial hit? And for me, I found ways where I was able to graduate law school not only debt free but with a profit, and without having gotten significant financial aid, as in scholarships from Berkeley. But I was able to find ways to make it, pay it. So that gave me a lot of opportunities to pursue things like my entrepreneurial venture after I graduated.
That makes a lot of sense. I sense that even if the sort of growth rate of law school admissions remains constant, do you find that that's resulting in just a plainly more competitive atmosphere for pre-law students now? And I ask this also with keeping in mind the fact that the GRE now is accepted, I believe, at all law schools, and more than that, the ABA had, a committee at least has voted to eliminate the test requirement entirely, which throws kind of a wrench into how competitive things will be as well. So I'm curious your perspective on that.
Adding the GRE means that there's more people. Like, I really suffered with the LSAT. I took
Right.
it 3. I didn't do well at all. In fact, I did progressively worse. And so I really had to bank on my personal statement and my application to kind of get me into Berkeley. Had I had the option to take the GRE instead of the LSAT, I probably would have opted for it. But, more and more law schools are taking on that perspective to take on the GRE as opposed to the LSAT, but not in the degree that all law schools are doing it. Also, there is that sense in undergrad that there's becoming a huge movement for test optional. I think 900 or almost 1,000 colleges are doing test optional for the LSAT. In fact, a lot of schools are not even wanting the option. They want to just get rid of it completely. When you do things like that, there's a hell of a lot more of a focus on your application, your story, your extracurriculars, your letters of recommendation, and obviously your grades. So the LSAT allowed you to have a way out if any of those were not good. If you crushed the LSAT, if you really crushed it, you could have poor recommendations, you can have a mediocre GPA, you could have minimal extracurriculars, your story could be kind of off, but you're still going to get into a top 20, top 30 if you crushed it. If you didn't, then you had to bank on everything else, like me. Now that is becoming more test optional, schools are trying to wane out of it. It means all those other aspects are going to be absolutely mission critical. It means what you're doing in undergrad is going to be super important. So you have to be thinking, if you want to go to law school, you got to be thinking about that in your sophomore, junior year. You also want to kind of consider taking that year out, maybe after graduating, so that you can really build up your profile, especially from an extracurricular, letters of rec, and your story, right? So there's ways that you can manage it. If your LSAT was going to be your strong suit, there has to be ways to offset it. If LSAT was never going to be your strong suit, then it's open season. That being said, you better have a really good overall application, because the schools are going to be really nitpicky about who they accept. And it may take even longer for them to review each person's application before they could do a fat cut and say, you got less than 155, you're out. Yeah. Now they're reading all kinds of materials to see if you fit.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting because the other factors, which haven't really changed, like extracurriculars, personal statements, letters of recommendation, it seems like those are naturally going to be weighed somewhat more now than they used to be. And I personally, I felt like the LSAT is flawed for a lot of reasons. Of course, I don't think it's super indicative of your success in law school, nor being a practicing lawyer. As exams go, they tend to bias towards native English speakers. And of course, you have the privilege problem of folks who have the resources taking all these prep courses to get a really good score, and those without it not having the same, luck. However, I've heard from our community actually that people feel like the privilege argument for the LSAT falls on its head. And by privilege argument, I mean that, folks who are privileged will do better, folks who do not have the funds cannot, because now that the needle has pointed towards your extracurriculars, well, guess who has the resources to do all of the super interesting extracurriculars and unpaid internships and things of that sort? It's also the folks with privilege. It raises, just a deeper question of how do we make this process as equitable as possible, given that the LSAT is not perfect, but certainly, like you said, it can help applicants sometimes climb out from the bottom when they may have messed up in college or something else happened. And I think that that's totally reasonable and totally fair.
It's an interesting one, right? Which is the metrics for assessing constantly bias those that have funds. And maybe somebody will argue, well, how's that the case if you're helping a nonprofit and so forth? And it's exactly the point, is if you don't have the funds and you're going to have to work a day job that may not necessarily be deemed volunteering or a nonprofit, like how can you afford to do that if you're someone who's more indigent and can't afford it? So to your point, you've really got to think out of the box, because there's going to be a point where these metrics will have to be adopted by everyone, regardless of your financial situation. And the only way out of that, Julian, is you have to be very effective in how you use your addendum. Because then you'll explain in your addendum, look, I am required, I need to take care of my family. Therefore, I couldn't take this internship I wanted that was free in Washington, D.C. or whatever, because I couldn't pay for my own housing and my flights and my food for free, or make like chump change when I'm working in this unpaid internship role, right? And so you put that in your addendum to explain why there may be a gap from the traditional things that schools want to see in your extracurriculars. And we can talk more about that as one of the levers that you have to help you with your application.
Yeah, I'd love to unpack that a little bit, because addendums, when I was applying, always seemed to be one of those like, oh, only use it if like you really, really need to. Like if you broke your leg and then you were gone 2 semesters, like use the addendum to explain that. But I'd love to hear broadly from you, of course, advice on the addendum specifically, because I think that's interesting. But what advice would you have to folks out there who are listening for, your standard, let's call it high school senior through junior level in college, who want to go into law school? What do you tell them right now, as someone who's very experienced in admissions? What should they do to optimize their application, so to speak, both now and when they actually apply?
Sure. So let's start with that, then we can work our way to the addendum. So the way that you want to think about it is you want to think about your story even as early as high school, and you're living your story.
Yeah.
Which is kind of bizarre, right? Because you're not going to apply until your senior year minimum, and then matriculate as soon as you graduate, so to speak. So if you're in high school, you're building your story. If you are in college, you're still building your story up to your rising senior year. And so building that story, and I'm sure, you of course had one, Julian, you went to Harvard Law, and obviously the admissions success there is like 8% or less. So you have to have something that really is incredible and stands out. So to that effect, think about what is the story that you want to bring to bear, and then build in the experiences that will make that story come to life. Much like a movie, you may have a mission that you want to have in the movie, like a hook, but to get to that hook, you have to have a story that's designed. You wouldn't have a movie which starts with the hook and ends just like that in 2 minutes. You've got to build it up, right? What's the context? What's the conflict? What's the resolution? And how does all of that come together? So if you're, let's say, starting in college and you want to go to law school, maybe, and I'll give an easy example, you have an immigrant background and you want to do immigration law and so forth, then you want to kind of work that system. You want to work that whole storyline. You know what the hook is. You want to do that. How do we get there? So you start volunteering at an immigration, clinic, or at an immigration law firm, or help, translation, go to court, do translation, help with domestic violence that may perpetrate, immigrant communities. And, those are more, that have less resources. Then you start building that story. So now, and if you can indulge me for a second, I have something called the ABC of the personal statement. A for attention grab, B for background, C for career, D for direction, E for educational institution, F for finale. You follow that structure, Okay, then you can literally say, okay, the attention grabber. Then you have that experience, and from that experience, you discern something that grabs their attention and pulls it in for the story. Like again, like a movie. How does Julian's movie start? It may be
Mm-hmm.
an action sequence and then pans back to the context. That's your background, right? And that's where Julian will start talking about his upbringing, where he grew up, his family, what they did, any issues that he faced while he was, in terms of his upbringing, what he did in college to study in terms of like who he is and what he's done. And then career could be academic career. It could also be professional career, any internships you've done, any volunteering that you've done, anything that you've done really particular that stands out in terms of your academics. And then all of that says, this is who I am. This is what I've done about it. Now I'm going to tell you what direction I want to go. And that's where you kind of lay out, I want to do immigration law. I want to focus on that. I want to help maybe immigrant business, small business owners with, businesses so that they don't fall into bankruptcy or getting swindled out of, through loans and, loan sharks and so forth, something to that effect, right? And that's your direction. That's the hook. That's the pivot point. That really is where it stands out. And then you say, but to get to this point, I need to practice law, and specifically at UCLA, Berkeley, Harvard, whatever it is, and then tell us why. And then bring the whole story back to the beginning in the finale. Now that I had this situation with John that I was helping with his application to get citizenship or whoever it is, that person now is is helping other people. I've seen him kind of grow from that perspective, and now he is a successful citizen in America doing X, Y, and Z. And this is just a story that I want to continue doing as an immigration lawyer in the future. So think about that design, A, B, C, D, E, and then work backwards to what experiences you need to prepare yourself to really create that story. And that's what you could be doing as early as high school or while you're in college. But you don't want to be doing it and thinking about that the summer of your junior year. Like it needs to kind of flow better.
Something that I've always felt like folks who intuitively did well in admissions processes did what they did, that I speak for myself here too. It's very much that word that you've been using again and again, which is a story. Because even though you are a human being and everybody else who's applying is also a human being, the only thing that these admissions officers are going to be able to paint by way of a picture of your identity is what you give them in the application. And the only thing that really lets you do that a compelling way, arguably, is the personal statement, maybe the letters of rec. So I think it's very important and very insightful that you comment on the fact that it's a story that matters, because your resume is going to be a resume at the end of the day, and they're going to know what you did for work experience. But the thing that's going to really make them, feel you like as an applicant, is the narrative that you tell. So I think that's wonderful advice.
Exactly. And imagine the resume is kind of like a outline script, but that the story is the actual movie. Because in the end of the
Right.
day, the resume will just be a catch-all that will catch anything
Right.
that you want to include in the different parts. But remember, there's 4 parts to the application. The resume, which is the catch-all, you want everything in there. You've got your personal statement, why you want to go to law school. But you've also got your diversity statement, which kind of explains more about who you are and what value you're going to add to the law school. And then you've got your addendum, which was what we just mentioned, which is, like you said, only write it in there if you have something to say. But that's not necessarily the case. It's another opportunity to put more information about you and your story. And that could be a medical tribulation. Like you said, I broke my leg, I was out for 2 semesters. That could be a legal issue that you face that you want to just say, look, I had this legal issue and this is where I am now. It could be about why you did poorly in the LSAT, poorly your GPA, poorly in a specific semester, right? And it's not a series of excuses, it's more of an explanation, owning that event, and then saying how you've grown from it and how that's going to help add to their law school community. So the addendum is mission critical, and I use it to great effect for doing so poorly in the LSAT by describing the fact that I studied abroad. I did the IB diploma. I studied in Egypt for 8 years in a British school. I'd never done well in the SAT. I didn't do well in the GRE, and I really didn't do well in the LSAT. But in each case, is when I was an undergrad at UCLA, graduate top of my class. When I was at Berkeley, I was on the law review. So my point was, I don't do well in a test environment for the standardized testing system, not tests in general, but the standardized test. But I do well when I am in an academic environment. And at the end of the day, that's what the law schools are looking for. Can you succeed in an academic environment? Can you succeed as a lawyer? Can you be a great brand ambassador for our school and for the legal profession? And that's the argument I made. So it wasn't that I was saying the test is not great. It doesn't test for X, Y, and Z. disparage the test. I just said I didn't do well. I tried, but there's other things that I want you to look at. And that's what the addendum and the power of the addendum can serve.
What percentage of folks, if you don't mind me asking, and feel free not to, of course, if you're not comfortable with it, folks that you work with in your admissions company, do you suggest add an addendum of sorts?
90%.
90%. Wow.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. Very rarely is somebody going to come work with Right Track who's got a 175, a 395, and had very little troubles in their lives. It just wouldn't happen. What's the point? Typically, the people we work with who could be anywhere below that, I mean, anybody gets like a 165 and says they want to write an addendum about when they got 165. I'm like, you're kidding. You're going to look like an idiot. You don't want to do that. 165 is a solid score. There's no reason, unless something really bad happened, you were scoring high 170s, and there was a fire in the building when you were taking the test. But typically, I use it even just to kind of add to their application, where I really don't want to in the personal statement. I just want to kind of pull something out and still talk about it, especially if it was any kind of weakness in their application. I want to use that opportunity to kind of talk about it. And remember, the addendum is only 400 words.
Sure.
You don't want to go on and on and on. You just want to use a very small way of capturing something that may be an afterthought of the admissions committee, and that just quickly answers that question. Why, Julian? Because we don't get interviews. We will never be interviewed in law school. So this is a great opportunity where you can put all your ducks into that application. Or like an MBA, it's a little different, right? Because you do have the opportunity to talk to an interviewer about any kind of questions that they may have about your application. Law school, you don't.
It brings me to one of the questions that I had for you. And usually I ask folks on the show if there's one thing about law that you would change, what would it be? But I think we have a unique perspective here talking to you. Everything you've seen, everything you've learned, what is something that you wish that law school admissions, I suppose in the US, because we're talking US context here, what do you think, what would you wish that they would change?
I mean, probably exactly that. I wish they would interview people. I think Northwestern was one of the few schools. I think if you had the opportunity, look, in the end of the day, guys, I argue this all the time, not because I'm old school. EQ and communication skills are absolutely beyond critical and very under focused in a lot of ways, and it's only getting worse. People who are stuck behind their screens and their computers, people that are banking on the metaverse to get them out of their rut. No, dude, it's all about how you can communicate. Look, we're on this call right now because of your approach, because of your ability to have strong EQ, to understand what I can offer to your audience and what you constantly offer through your guests to your audience. And how are you doing that? Save the fact you're sitting here in front of me, you're doing it on a computer. I can see your facial expressions, how it changes, the tonality of your voice, the cadence. All of that is so important to be able to read. So if you're able to have an interview with someone from that school, and I would, for example, as a UC Berkeley alum, I would interview 10, 20, 30 people. I would no problem doing that. In fact, every year I try to, whenever I'm asked, to call back students who are admitted but are on the fence for Berkeley Law, right? And I just tell them, hey, listen, I'm open to any questions you have. Let me tell you, because I love talking about my experience at Berkeley because it was so unique. Working on the law review, I started a law journal. I taught classes in the undergrad to pay off my tuition. You know, I did so much crazy stuff at Berkeley that was really deviating from the path that most law schools take. And so I would be more than happy to speak to somebody and suss out if they're a good fit for Berkeley as an alum. It's the least I would be able to do. So I would say if I change it, that's so important, because you don't want people in the legal profession that have such poor EQ and such poor empathy and a sense of compassion, you know? So that's what I would change.
It's first of all, I fully agree with you. I really do wish, even if it were just a 20-minute feeler, you know, like something is better than nothing. And it would give people such a deep lens into the actual applicant's persona and everything they're about in a way that we just completely miss right now. And I agree again that with what you said about, you know, to be a lawyer, you need to know how to communicate effectively with people. Clients are people, even if it's a giant company. If you're out there doing pro bono work or public defense or prosecutorial work, it doesn't, you know, you need to know how to interplay with the judge. You need to know how to interplay with opposing counsel. You need to know how to manage people and teach people. All of these things go back to what you were saying, which is identifiable characteristics of what you bring to the table persona-wise in an interview that you just cannot do right now. I'll say for the record before we move on that medical school, which, you know, Kat, my fiance, you know, went through that whole rigorous process, and I've seen it. They have multiple interviews to even get it. I mean, they have secondary applications, let alone the interviews. Like you apply once, basically, which is the law school app, like the same sort of stuff. And then only some schools will give you a secondary app where you have to write another 3 essays. And then after that, you'll get interviewed. And it's a rigorous, extremely rigorous process. But I think the schools know what they're getting at the end of the day. And the same can't really be said about law schools here because we're so reliant on these bigger metrics. Before we wrap, I give every guest an option to ask me a question if you would like. And, I'm doing a lot of different things right now, obviously mental health advocacy, entrepreneurialism, trying to, bring conversations about mental health and legal profession forward any way I can, including by taking on folks on this podcast and YouTube channel. I will leave it to you, Hamada, if you have any specific questions for me.
Well, I think it's the obvious that most people probably do ask you is law school. I'll preface this that law school is a place that can really make or break people.
Yeah.
Mentally and otherwise, right? So when you start the first year of law school, you've gone from an undergraduate where you pretty much can take a whole myriad of different courses to when you start law school, you're suddenly strapped by certain courses and things that you don't want to necessarily do. Then you have crazy inferiority complex. So suddenly you start seeing everybody around you taking copious notes and outlining and then you start feeling, oh my God, I'm completely out of my element. And then that starts to wane on your own mental health. So for me, and I think back when I was at law school in 2004 to 2008, because I took that year out, I don't feel like mental health was a huge factor. I think a lot of people were the suck it up attitude and just get through it. If you survived, great. And if you didn't, that's on you. I never forget a situation when I had gone through like a breakup during law school and so forth. And I remember the professor or the dean of students was like, look, forget about that person right now. You have to think about your own health and your own mental health. And I remember it just being, wow, I had never even thought about from that perspective because I just had felt so guilty about that breakup. And then later on, I had another situation during the bar exam. Same thing came up, same thing about mental health because you just don't have time to breathe because you're focused so much in that 2.5, 3 months on studying for the bar that your mental health takes a toll. What do you suggest to people as they start law school, especially that first year where they don't have really time to think, to prepare mentally for what's going to happen, how to maintain that throughout law school?
Yeah, so I will say, and before I answer, full disclosure, that I don't believe that I did this well, frankly, and appropriately. And it's part of why I'm so passionate about spreading the word now is because I saw how much I suffered unnecessarily by my own hand, and I don't want that to happen to other folks. The first thing that I would say is for folks to build up the fundamentals of mental, eating well and cooking for oneself, sleeping at a reasonable hour, hydration, deep breathing, and doing 10 minutes of meditation. All sounds like common sense and easy. The discipline to do it every single day and to do it well qualitatively every single day, not easy. So I would start there. The second thing I would say is 1L year is notoriously going to be competitive and is generally high pressure because a lot of firms, of course, hire based on your 1L grades. And that's basically, I mean, when I was in law school, it was your entire cost of tuition, $300K in 3 years, right? All of this, in my mind, boiled down to how do I perform in this first year? Because OCI at the beginning of 2L year is going to be evaluating me based on my 1L grades. This year is effectively the only thing that matters for job opportunities, which, putting that issue aside, because that's, of course, very problematic, it's a lot of pressure. So I don't think you're going to be able to get rid of the pressure, but what you can do is learn to set boundaries and adequately practice them. So close the book at a certain time every night and just put it away and do something else. Find the thing that energizes you and helps your brain sort of relax and do that more often. It's counterintuitive, but I bought an Xbox One at the time, which was new, years ago, in between my first and second semesters. And I remember thinking, man, I'm going to bring this thing back and I'm probably not going to get that much work done. Like, this is going to affect my studying habits, whatever. I ended up doing better my second semester than my first because I had my Xbox there to relax me and let me unwind a little bit. Whereas before, I would try to force myself into like watching some TV show that I didn't really love, or maybe doing some meditation. And so I think it's also very important for folks to think creatively and subjectively about like, what is it for you that helps ground you and clear your head? It's not going to be the same for everybody. And I'm not saying that as a lawyerly answer to say that it depends. But I really mean that to effectively manage mentally, you need to be creative and imaginative and open-minded with the various avenues that are at your disposal to help yourself, weather the storm, because it's absolutely a storm and it's a lot of pressure. And you mentioned that you didn't really discuss mental health or it wasn't really talked about back when you went to law school. I hate to say that, like, I don't really think that's changed. And, you know, we've had students that we've lost at my alma mater year over year to suicide. You have conversations at a high level discussing the importance, right? You maybe get an email or two from the office of the president or, you know, leadership, but culturally, conversationally, casually, it's very much still absent. And, you know, the numbers back it up. Something like 50% of law students report having anxiety. In our profession, it's even worse. You know, 70% have anxiety right now, nearly 40% depression. We didn't get here by accident. And I think the lack of conversations in law schools and the lack of this prioritization that you mentioned is unfortunately still a very big problem. And so I would just tell people that's a long way of saying be creative with finding time for yourself and then practice it, because you have to really, really go against the system and the narrative that's in front of you to effectively do that. And I promise, even if you think you're relaxing enough or you're doing a lot, you're probably not even doing that much, because our standard right now and what we've normalized is so deeply low.
Right, I agree. In law school, for me, I think what was helpful was one, exercising, because it kind of transcended throughout everything. So I played like intramural soccer. I went to the gym as often as I could, and I think that obviously helped clear my head, and especially kind of prepared me even for the bar exam, because then you were able to exercise throughout the bar during that time because you had to set those boundaries. Sleeping well, I think I started using earplugs in law school so that I could just kind of zone in, and then it's just become a habit since then, so I could have, you know, deep sleep so I can wake up well rested. I think figuring out what study habit you works best for you is absolutely important before you start law school. So figuring out, does outlining work better for you? Does reading the text? Like I stopped reading the textbooks, the Aspens, those things were ridiculous. I would just go to, you know, examples and explanations, pull it out. And then what else worked really well for me was forming really deep study groups. So once I figured that out, it reduced the stress because it made whenever I studied as productive and as possible. And the end of the day, in addition to that, as I said, the debt that I was going to get scared the hell out of me. So I was lucky enough to get teaching experiences at Berkeley as a TA or a GSI when I was at law school. So that helped me pretty much pay almost all my tuition. They gave me a stipend and they helped me even make a monthly salary. And that was awesome because I was like kicking it with undergrads. So it kind of got me out of that funk of being in law school in that stuffy library when I'm seeing everybody working, to being on campus and chilling, especially if you're lucky enough to be like, you know, Harvard right there, HLS is right next to the main campus. So you can kind of wander into like Widener Library and, you know, do what have you. While, you know, like Georgetown, unfortunately, is on the opposite side from where the undergrad is.
Yeah.
But Berkeley was all there in one location. So I could just kind of meander off and kind of just clear my head, which I thought was really important. These are kind of really important ways, like you said, to kind of create those boundaries, create distractions, but are fruitful distractions that will allow you to re-energize so that when you come back to studying, you're pumped with certain timeframes. And I'm telling you, and Julian, you know this well, those habits continued.
Yeah.
I use them as a professional. I use them now, years after law school, to be able to succeed without, because mental health transcends, as you said. If 50% people have anxiety and depression in law school and 70 in the legal profession, I mean, you're saying it only gets worse because systemically we're not tackling it at the front. So it's something that if you can't tackle it from law school, it's going to follow you and haunt you throughout the rest of your life. So super important. I really applaud you for what you're doing, because you're not only helping people succeed in law school, you're saving lives. And helping veterans, as I do right now. 80+% of the veterans have anxiety, mild depression, and you know, acquired psychological disorder, leading to, you know, significant PTSD, which, as we know, up to 22 veterans commit suicide a day. So I see the mental health. I know how important it is. I know how many people suffered from it in law school and elsewhere. So I applaud you for what you're doing, and happy to support it in any way.
Thank you, Hamada. I very much appreciate it. On that note, I will accept the graciousness. It's very, very kind of you. Hamada, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, and I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully you have an opportunity to speak to your audience again.
Awesome. Take care.
Take care.